Okay, so yes, there are many aspects to animal symbolism, and part of the complexity is that it depends on the culture. In the West, the Judeo-Christian West, snake is just pure evil because it's associated with the devil, and nobody has anything good to say about snake. In Asia, snakes are much more, as you've mentioned, much more honored and are animals related to various gods and goddesses. One theory about why snakes are so demonized in the West is that when Judaism came in, when the patriarch...
So there's something to be said. I'm not sure what it is. Sorry, Eric's back.
I'm back. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I'm back. But I'm sorry. You were saying something, Bronwyn? Go ahead.
Just talking to Smita about, and I'm not sure what point we could make out of it, except that some cultures and their animal archetypes, or whatever you want to call them, are probably more powerful as a single identity than the Indian ones.
Can I say also something?
Can I add?
Go ahead.
I use a lot of symbols in my work, in my therapy, and usually I really try to avoid to directly interpret a symbol or an archetype for a person. Not if it's a group, and maybe you are with that group within enough time that you know that they culturally and psychologically are moving more or less to let's say a certain direction, then okay. Otherwise, I would suggest as an extra, let's say, game or an extra exercise to ask them how they feel about it and what's their story behind that. Because even though in my culture, for example, in Bulgaria, even though we are Christian, the symbol of snakes and dragons are actually positive, because probably our culture initially historically comes from Asia, and in Asia the dragon has, from China and so on, has actually a positive attitude. The rest of Europe is negative. So let's say if I absorb this more throughout my cultural background, I am still tapped into the background of the rest of Europe, which is negative. So I have both, and I also might unconsciously or consciously use both versions according to maybe the story and the moment. So I would always ask that person, or even make another exercise within a group to invite them to express their own interpretation. Also because it's if you give them an input with an interpretation which is yours through your filter, let's say we are giving them a pattern on which they are walking, but that might not be the correct pattern for them. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's a very shaky, it's a thin ice to walk on. Yeah.
I have a quick suggestion as well, if I may.
Go ahead.
So sometimes I would do the same exercise, and I resonate with what Biljana said. And then I would, in a corporate environment, give them a business problem. And I would say that if you five each were the animal that you picked up, what is one strength of the animal which the five of you would get together to solve this business problem? And that kind of helps them to give a positive attribute to that animal, and therefore take back that confidence with them. So that's something I do sometimes, and that helps, really helps.
Again, that is working off the fact that people do associate personality traits with the different animals, and I agree also with Biljana that we have to look at each case uniquely. What I was saying before I got disconnected was that when Judaism and then Christianity were implemented, this was part of the patriarchal takeover. Certainly on the mythological level, and probably on social level too in certain ways. So what happened was that the animals that were associated with the with the pre-Christian gods and goddesses, including the snake, all of those animals were demonized along with the god and goddess. So animals that were associated with ancient goddesses include snakes, pigs, rabbits, and the holdover we have in Easter of somehow it being associated with bunny rabbits and Easter eggs. It's from pre-Christian goddess worship. So luckily the rabbits didn't get demonized, but the pigs and the snakes did.
I didn't know that exactly.
Also, snakes shed their skin. They're associated in a sense with a cyclical sense of the cosmos, and that is antithetical to the Judeo-Christian Islamic worldview, which tries to transcend nature and the cycle of life and death. Okay, so animals, that's just one metaphor. Let's go on to colors and other metaphors. But okay, before we go on, did somebody wanted to say something?
No.
Eric, just want to add on.
Okay. Please.
From an Indian mythology perspective, snakes are actually considered very highly secretive. And the reason is they are underground most of the time, cold-blooded. And the point that you mentioned so beautifully is that they shed their skin. So which is they take birth in a different perspective. So they're considered to be highly secretive from a nature's point of view. So that's also taken into account.
Highly secretive. And what's this expression about snake's ears? Sometimes I hear it here in India. Somehow that's...
Yes, they say pambakada. Yes, that's because snakes, I don't think snakes have ears. I am sure of that. But I think it's about the vibrations that they pick up from far away. So it's more about... it's talking about that. I think
they're very sensitive.
So it's an unconscious, subconscious way of...
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
That's what exactly. Yes.
You have also the expression a snake tongue in India?
That's
right.
Snake's tongue is where it uses to get the smell. That's how it actually smells. So it uses the... it's like the antennae of the cockroaches. So forked tongue actually helps in getting the vibrations or whatever. So it's basically the subconscious way of relating to understanding something is why we use snake's ears as a metaphor. And another thing is for what Smita said, the mouse is considered to be a very tiny animal, but Ganesha sitting on that. There is also a mythological connection to it where Ganesha makes himself very light and only then sits on the mouse. So in Indian mythology, basically, all the animals are, made as God's vehicles. So for one reason is because we should not be hurting them. So that is the connection to why the animals are all. I think that's what happens with other in different other parts of the countries as well. But apart from that, each animal which is associated with a particular god also has certain characteristics, like Sid had mentioned, like it's very secretive, and for the snake, and for the mouse, it's very small and tiny, but again, it's very intelligent. So all these characteristics of animals get associated with the mythological story that it is connected to the god or the goddesses.
And if these animals do come up in people's the stories they enjoy or the dreams that they have, we have to investigate and see what that animal is symbolizing for them.
Yes.
In
that's
tribal.
Exactly why.
In tribal. Go ahead. Yep.
Sorry.
That's the reason
that's
why.
The reason why I put up this question. I'm answering Bronwyn's question as to why I put this up as a question. Because I feel like what Biliana said, I feel it's very dicey to use animals as without understanding what's the interpretation of the other person. that's the reason why I kind of raised the question here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Of course, in tribal cultures and some other traditional cultures, people feel associated with particular animals, and the Western term is that people have a certain totem animal that they feel related to in various ways, and especially the ritual leaders, shamans, will often have a special relationship with a particular animal, and may feel that in symbolic terms or in real terms, that the person can turn into that animal or travel with those animals. It has some deep relationship with the particular animals. So we may not believe all of that literally today, but still we do develop close emotional and psychological relationships with particular animals. Okay, just to look at a few more types of metaphors. Color. I'm feeling blue. I guess universally refers to feeling melancholy. Although, whenever the Virgin Mary was painted in European painting, she was always dressed in light blue. And it seems that represents a heavenly calm color also.
Here in Brazil, blue it's not melancholic.
What is it?
No. It's kind of calm, tranquility, blue sky, but don't seem to me that for other when I discover in that blue is melancholic for other people, I'm surprised about. I was surprised about.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, these colors can mean different things in different situations and different colors. Green. People say, "I'm green with envy," or "I'm green like I'm nauseous. I'm gonna vomit." But then people also talk about green activities. Green things are sustainable activities. I'm sorry, somebody said something about green?
Growth.
Growth, yes, absolutely. Anything having to do with plants. Sometimes,
Green when you say that somebody is immature.
Yes, that means young, like a fruit is immature. Especially in India, if people want to say the banana's not ripe, they'll say it's green.
Correct.
Oh, that's true.
So also, but we have the colors associated with gods as well in India. So green, for example, is considered to be the color of Rama, epic Ramayana. So he's considered to be green in color. I'm still not sure why. But blue is associated with poison. As in Nilakanta, Shiva has got a blue throat because when he drank poison to save the world, his throat became blue in color. Similarly with Krishna, he also has a blue body.
Can I contradict here? Actually, Krishna is Shyama. No, Shyama is actually not blue. It's the dusk, the color of the dusk.
Dark
skin.
Basically, dark sky, dark blue. So that's how it's said. So somehow the colors associated with gods predominantly
do they have to do with the chakras somehow? Because I know that certain gods are connected to planets in India, and the planets are connected to the colors also of the chakras. The chakra theme is a universal body system of universe as well.
Right. But I have no idea about that.
Right. Yeah, it's expression, of course. Krishna is also expressing. I don't know so much about Indian mythology, but.
So again, this speaks to the importance of knowing the local context, the local meaning, and the individual meaning of a person when they use color in a story.
Yeah.
Let's just review, talk for a minute in general about why a client might enjoy, or why we or a client might enjoy things that we feel are metaphors. Is there a general value to metaphors? Is there a general benefit or pleasure? What are some functions of metaphors that make them valuable, especially in healing work?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I think metaphors give you a very somatic feeling of completion when you want to express a particular feeling or emotion that you're going through.
So somatically feeling?
You feel, yeah. So there is some part of your body when you use a metaphor, which kind of feels complete. So your expression of that feeling feels complete, especially when I use a metaphor. That I'm feeling blue today. There is some part of my body which feels relieved having expressed specifically through that metaphor. And that's how I feel when I use metaphors. I'm on top of the world, for example. It makes me actually feel more confident and more in charge and more in control somatically. I go through that physically.
Wonderful. Smita, did you?
Yeah, I just have a question, not a question. What I mean to say is that maybe metaphors is a way of when a person just feels that he is not a part. See, because when somebody comes for therapy and somebody has realized that they want to have a talk or they want to open up, the first thing they want to do is they don't want to seem out, or they don't want to seem odd. They want to show it to whoever they're talking that, I have just another thing, and I'm one among many. I think maybe metaphors bring that out. I think.
Again, if it's conventional, and also metaphors that have to do with nature, like he's turning over a new leaf, or we're looking under every stone, or he's leaving no stone left unturned. These metaphors give us a feeling that we are connected with the world of nature, as well as the world of humans. Any other thoughts about metaphors?
Yeah, if I may just add, when I talk about metaphors, it's basically, I might not express everything that I'm going through, but it's easy for me to convey it, because if it's same context, then the other person can pick it up easily, and I don't have to explain the background to the situation. Only when it's required, then I can open up and talk, but otherwise I can just express it off, and the other person just understands what position am I in, or what's my thinking going around there.
I also think it's a subconscious process. If we're talking that the client is using metaphors, of disowning, not knowing how to own parts of ourselves and to really stand behind specific raw feelings, especially. So we all tend to project on the outside and use something which is in our environment in order to somehow get close to that connection. But I have the feeling, besides the therapeutic and creative part, metaphors many times can be used by clients who really can't stay behind what's happening and can't say it in a first form? In an I form. And because Eric was telling that you can use also something in the third form, so a metaphor would actually be a way of using a third form to express a feeling or a story.
Yes. So you can say stories in general are metaphors for aspects of our own experience, or any character or particular characters are metaphors for us. And there does seem to be a pleasure and a value of, at times, if I don't want to talk about me, but I'm interested in talking about a character like me who's had some sort of similar situation, it's more comfortable to talk about it in an externalized form. Okay, so this is all to keep in mind, because the culmination of the storytelling therapy process is helping a client to either that she develops it on her own, or we help her develop a metaphorical story that that she loves, that she takes to heart, and that she uses to inspire herself. All right. Well, once again, we've spent a lot of time talking about very interesting matters, and we need to do a couple of life stories. So let's see. Vikas, Biljana, Bronwyn, Smita, who wants to go first?
Can I go first?
Please.
Also because I don't know if we're finishing at like in half an hour, because it's I've left 90 minutes and I'm working later, so maybe it will be not precise. Yeah, because it's right in the middle of my day.
Okay,
yes.
I'm sorry.
We'll stop in about 30 minutes, but we'll have time for 2 or 3 life stories. So, but go ahead. You go ahead now, please.
Guys, just excuse me, please. There's just one emergency.
That's fine. Back. Yeah, we heard the doorbell. That's fine. Go ahead, Biljana.
I should start without her?
Yeah, she can see the recording.
Okay. So, okay. I thought to tell the story in a third person, also because it's I would like to give some more metaphors. I got inspired by the reading, so I will try this. So, once upon a time, in the country of the mysterious women voices, that was called Bulgaria, there was a conflict, a regime that was reigning, and it was a regime of the red color. There was a girl named Biljana that was born there. Her family was very beautiful. Her family was usually using many colors, many voices, many stories, and she grew up within her family in a very free way. But when she was getting outside of the family, getting in touch with the rest of the world that she looked at, she just was seeing the color red, and she didn't really like that color. Also because that color made her feel very oppressed, very angry, and she couldn't find a voice to sing with that color. She liked different ones. So within time, she was growing up, she had the possibility to get out of that country. And because it was the country of the mysterious women voices, she really wanted to find her own voice. Outside of this color, she knew she had so many different possibilities. So she started her journey. That country that she was born into was usually a very cold country. The climate was harsh. There were many mountains there and very icy lakes. So she knew this, and this was familiar for her. But the first journey she got into the first country she got into the journey was Switzerland. It was a very similar country with lots of mountains and with snow and lakes. And there she tried to find her voice, to sing the way she would like to, or use the color she would like to. She learned a lot of things, but she got very blue there. Most of the people were very reserved, and they didn't understand her story she was telling. So she moved on. She moved a little bit further in the south, where she said, maybe some sun will help here. Maybe I can get my color blue from Switzerland to get into something warmer. And she thought, warmer, but not really like the red. I would like to look for some other color. So she went towards Italy. In Italy, people were singing, no? The opera comes more or less from Italy. So she said, maybe she can find her voice there. She went into a special school, which was a creative school, and she learned all the colors possible to use, all the possible music. And she was really happy there. Until a moment came somehow in her blood, or maybe her mysterious voice still was calling her somewhere else. She said, okay, with Italy is finished, I need to renew my stories and to look for something different. And she started traveling for more than 2 years as a nomad without having a place to sleep, really like to call home for a longer time, and changing. What was her work? Her work was giving workshops, creative workshops, and she was also doing design with her computer. So the work was with her also. And then she started to do a world travel, a world journey. She traveled through India, through Thailand, most of Asia, to gather stories and different colors, to understand why people were using different colors and symbols. And this is how slowly she was starting to find her own voice within that millions and millions of possibilities. Something slowly was actually gathering within her, synthesizing within her, until she found a moment in a Tibetan monastery very high up in India, in the Ladakhi border, where she said, wow, I would love to stay here for some time. And she stayed there about 4 months, painting mandalas. And the mandala was actually one of the best possibilities that she saw, instruments that she started using, where she found out that she can combine all the different geometries, colors, and words and languages into one picture, because that picture was a multi-leveled picture. It was actually representing the world, her own and the world of the people. So this is how she slowly found out that her voice doesn't have to be only one, and it can be anything else synthesized into one. So after that journey, she got back in Europe, and she decided to apply what she found out for her. She get back to Bulgaria, where the red regime or the red color had already changed. So she started actually helping her own family and families all around in Bulgaria to use this multiplicity of possibilities and colors and voices. And later on, she moved to Spain, where she really loved the people and the food and the lots of colors Spain also had, because Spain is very, very connected to South America, and it's an international place. And this is where she continues with her mandalas. And she's well.
Wonderful.
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 Very nice.
Thank you.
Did I mention that I was in Spain last year in Sintra? Have you been to Sintra, Biliana?
It's Portugal. Sintra is Portugal.
Ah, yes, it's near Lisbon. Oh, I'm sorry, I confused.
No,
but
it's okay.
have you been there? You've heard of it? You've heard of Sintra?
Yes, I have friends in Sintra.
It's a hill station. For those of you who don't know, it's a hill station. Just like in India, we have hill stations where it's relatively cool and the air is wonderful to smell and breathe. And it's become a real center for workshops for the international creative class. To just like many of us, we go to Dharamsala, or we go to certain places in Indonesia. Sintra has also become a place like that. Okay, so that story you told, it was the main character was a seeker, a searcher, who was searching for her own voice, or searching for the many voices inside of her, and the many colors inside of her, and how to activate them and let them play and work together. And it sounds like she found it, especially in Italy, and then later in that monastery in Ladakh.
Yeah.
And then once she, had those experiences, I'm imagining after that, then she really could lead wonderful workshops to help other people find those voices and those colors within themselves.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So red for you red in that story was a little bit of a repressive. If you had a feeling of oppression or repression.
I love red color, but for a long time in my childhood, red is still connected a lot to the communist regime that we had. This was a very, I would say, harsh times for Bulgaria and for people to grow up in.
Isn't that's so funny? Because that's so interesting. Yeah, no, because red to me here in India, to me, I think of goddesses. Because many women have the red, like some people even in this video conference have that red.
Bindi.
Yes. And sometimes in movies when women get angry or when they become inspired by the goddess, that bindi gets big, and the hair comes loose, and it's like you don't know what's going to happen next. The sky might fall. So I associate red actually as a dangerous color here in India, because and I associate it somehow with the fury, the divine female fury. I don't know if it's just my imagination. But there is this global sense of seeing red having to do with anger, right? Like in a bullfight, they taunt the bull with a red cloth, and we have this expression in the USA, he's seeing red, which means he's full of anger. But you were not using it so much in the angry sense. You were using it more in the sense of the communist
First
oppression.
for this, and then it can be a metaphor for something. I mean, most of the how do you say, the street lights have a red light where you have to stop. So it is a warning kind of color. No, there is something happening there. For me, red is beautiful generally because it represents life fully, but life also has life can be also fire, but fire can give nurture and also take life away. I think red is really an amazing color.
But your story was really all about discovering.
It was about communism, yeah. It was about
but your story was about discovering and putting into play and working and playing with a full variety of colors.
Yeah, because of course, I mean, in the communist regime was all about really brainwashing of how you think or what you're using or certain things you are supposed to read or not read or see and so on. I mean, everything which was coming from the Western culture was considered how they were even using the word a rotten mentality, infiltrated the spy mentality and so on. They were saying that the capitalist people were eating children and so on. And it's funny because afterwards, within time, I found out that people in the Western world were talking about communists exactly in the same way as spies and as people that were eating children and so on. I mean, it's funny. So of course, it's straightening the vision of something, the expression of something into one wave, into one line.
Yeah, for sameness.
This is why I talk about the voices. And also Bulgaria, it is considered musically, there is a choir called the Mysterious Bulgarian Voices. It's a very specific way of singing. So that's why I use metaphors also because of this. The women have a very high pitch of a way of singing, which is specific for Europe at least.
Okay, so in your story, I think any color, if there's only one color, there's some oppression or repression going on, because what your character wants is the diversity, and that's I guess this is why the gay, lesbian, bi, trans community have chosen kind of the rainbow of colors to represent themselves. So they transform. At least I've seen the USA flag transformed from 2 colors to many, many colors. Wonderful. Okay, I guess we're going to have one more story. Any other thoughts by anyone before we leave the story for now?
Yeah, if I may just add, when I heard Bilyana's story, such a beautiful narrative, first of all, and to me, it was a river flowing through. Wherever there's an obstacle, keep moving, keep wandering, meandering through different places, finding out different learnings, freshening up, and then it's like meeting the ocean right now to see how these different colors that you've collected is getting used. For me, that's how I was going through the journey as she went from one country to the other country.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Beautiful metaphor. Beautiful.
You were awesome, because I was thinking on how am I going to write my life story using metaphor. So that was when I read Eric's paper, and I was very intrigued by the use of traditional culture and metaphors. So now when you're telling me about the mysterious choir in your country, which you related it to your story, I think it's giving me a very great clarity. So I should thank you for mentioning that. So it helps a lot. Thank you so much. Such a beautiful story. I'll never forget this.
Thank you.
Such strong visuals. It just created such strong visuals inside the head.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For me, I wanna share 2 things. One is thank you, Bilyana. That was a very, very inspiring story, and I think the way you said it was so beautiful for me. And somehow I just saw you as this very, very vivacious girl, lady from Sound of Music.
Beautiful.
And what I'm thinking is maybe Sound of Music is also somebody's story who had to leave his country and then come to another country to protect his or her sound of music. And I think that's the bigger learning from Sound of Music. So I wish you the happy singing always, Bilyana.
Thank you. Thank you.
In the Sound of Music, they not only had to escape the Nazis, but she had to escape the convent. The convent was too, it was constrictive on her. So she needed the freedom outside that system. Okay, good. Now let's have one more. And again, of course, it does not have to be in symbolic form. It can just be ordinary. I was born in such and such a place, and here I am today. Vikas, Bronwyn, or Smita?
I'm taking a rain check today.
Okay. Bronwyn or Smita, don't make me do it. You want me to do it?
Smita, are you ready? Last time you were saying you were going to wait until you were ready. Are you ready?
Yeah, I am. But right now, I have to tell you, my daughter just came home with a hurt, and my mind is really not organized. I'm actually looking at the door all the time. So she's just back all crying, and it's all sobbing all over. So I'm just, in fact, I missed Bilyana's. I'll let you catch up the recording.
Yes.
I'm not in no, but definitely I did. Sorry.
Well, Vikas, are you being that mouse, Vikas? Or am I? That's me. Fine. So, and if I don't turn a timer on, I'll probably speak for 50 minutes.
No, right. Take a good 10 minutes if you like, and if somebody has to leave, it's 7:51. We officially have 9 minutes. We're going to go a little bit over. So if you have to leave, that's okay. You can see the end on recording. So go ahead, Bronwyn.
So trying to find a frame for not one story, but hundreds of stories. And the one that I've come up with, which won't be the final one, obviously, is hindsight. And I remember from a lot of years, there was a lot of sarcasm about hindsight. There's a saying which I can't find and I can't remember that's very sarcastic about hindsight, but it's relating to people who say that they knew something was going to happen and they didn't really, but they're pretending they're using hindsight.
One expression is hindsight is always 20/20.
Indeed. There's another lovely one about, I wrote it down. The historian's necessary vice, which I like because that's the antidote or the antithesis of the sarcastic statement. And it's been of huge value to me, A, in coming up with this story, B, in studying story, and C, in surviving what I can only call the midlife crisis. And I could stop now because really what you said, Eric, was my story. Thank you so much. But anyway, so midlife crisis, which I had a few years ago, and if that's midlife, then I'm going to live to way beyond 100, which is nice, I think. So, but it was a classic. The boys had left home and got married. My husband had pretty much retired and was at home more often. I'd found my job, beautiful job, but it was starting to be a bit restrictive, so I left that and stopped my career as a librarian. My 30 years, huge work and involvement in a public speaking group, I'd sort of outgrown or wasn't comfortable with anymore. So I'd left all of those things without any thought, just responding to that river that you were talking about, Sid, maybe. I've never really set goals, or if I did, they were very subconsciously done. I hate goal setting workshops because I just don't do it. I don't know. Anyway, so all of a sudden, I didn't really want to get out of bed in the morning. This is not right. I was reading all these books saying that you're supposed to have this divine given purpose and it's going to have you leaping out of bed with joy and enthusiasm for the day, and it wasn't there. So I lay in bed thinking, woe is me, because I'm very good at telling myself sad stories. And this happened day after day, and I thought, don't like this at all. Got to do something to find a way forward, because it was a particular 0 birthday as well, and I didn't have a quarter life crisis. I didn't have crisis at any other zeros, but this one, for some reason, I decided was getting old. And what is there now? Just downhill and die. Ew. So there's an awful lot there to be dealt with. And if I'm going to move forward, I need to find a way. And I'd heard about having a word for a year. So I went exploring back into the hindsight, back into the past, into me. Who's me? What does me really like doing? I've got what? I don't know. Anyway, came up with 4 words: create, connect, explore, Billiana and Sid, explore, and story. Now, those are 4 stories in themselves, but I'm going to stick with the story one. And I think it was partly because it's trendy, the words everywhere, but there was something else. There's something about story that says deep within, that says comfort, that says intrigue, that says a whole lot of things. So I went looking at story and why and wherefore and what does it really mean and what can I do with it? Why is it calling like this? So let me use this as a way of telling a story about my life, I suppose. And I mean, for all of us, all right, for me, story's been there always. I was born to reasonably elderly parents. Dad was 50 and Mum was 42 on a farm in Queensland, Australia. And much loved, obviously, because I don't think I was expected. I think they'd probably given up on having children. One of the highlights was going to town and going to the library and having the latest Peter Rabbit story by Beatrix Potter. And my mother read to me constantly. She told me she was a storyteller, told stories to entertain, but also to teach. And the ones that I remember, at the time, I didn't think I'm being taught. I just thought it was her doing her thing, was part of growing up. But I remember particularly the teenage years when I was the hormones were fairly rampant. So when we travelled the country roads past particular houses and particular farms, I would hear the stories of the farmers' daughters who had a wonderful life ahead of them until they started getting involved with the hired hand, and then they married the hired hand, didn't they? They had to marry the hired hand, didn't they? And look at the terrible mess they're in now because the hired hand wasn't providing nearly as much as Dad could have. And another story that has stuck with me, and obviously it has other meanings that I'm going to understand one day, but was about me and the boyfriend that I had at the time at the local show. So I spent a lot of time with him. There's a word called canoodling, which I like. So there was a certain amount of that, but it was always in public, just on a seat somewhere. But somebody that my mother didn't particularly like that got under her skin told her all about how he'd seen her daughter with the boyfriend canoodling somewhere. So my mother told me the story of being told this and how embarrassed and insulted she felt. So there wasn't a statement ever, this is how you should live your life. There were all these stories about how it would impact, and from her particular set of values, obviously. So Dad, on the other hand, didn't read books, certainly not fiction. Fiction is lies. Books are lies. But I watched him and his older sister. She was born in 1904. He was born in 1906, sitting at the kitchen table after tea while Mum washed up and telling each other stories about the olden days, their childhood. And the one that sticks is they would get up before dawn to get the cows in on the dairy farm, barefoot, not sure why, whether they couldn't afford shoes or they just didn't wear them, walking on cow pats to keep their feet warm because it was freezing cold. Not as cold as Bulgaria, I don't think, Biljana, but it was cold. It would have been 0 Celsius at least. And I'm not sure whether they were warm cow pats and soft because of they just come out of the body, or whether they just happened to be dry and warmer than the ground. And in the dark, and their breath was misting, they could hear movement, so they were getting a little bit nervous. And then suddenly, and Auntie Tessie would say, and Lloydie, remember that white patch we saw and we thought it was a goat and we were so scared, and it was only the old cow. And again, it was part of my childhood. It was just them telling the stories. But I was learning about sibling support. I was learning about how it was to live then, how you survived that sort of challenge, how you grew up like that, the family values, just as I was learning from my mother and the stories that she told about her family and the sorts of values that there were. So I went to school and university, and I was good at school. It's called brainy or something, or just having an academic brain, good at public speaking too, just as a matter of interest. And studied history, was good at history. But always there was this kind of duality between university, which was this life where you did what you did, and there was this life, which was finding about those boys who'd turned into men, what alcohol and drugs were about, forming relationships, how to be independent. But those two things were different, very much apart. And as I've been looking at story over the last few years, first of all, I thought it's because history was all just facts. This king, this date, that date, this revolution. You've got to go, Biljana. See you. I hope you have a colourful day.
Okay, keep going, Bronwyn.
And that I'd much rather read historical novels, because you learn so much about the people, what they were thinking, what they were feeling, what they were doing, and why. And you learn so much from books, and their story again, we learn from it. We learn how to live. We learn who we are, how we could be. But now I'm starting to see, as you said at the beginning, Eric, about how we need to have a perspective on what's changing and how it's changing in our world. And that's what history did for me, and I'm so grateful now. And that's 10 minutes. So I'm just entranced with the power of story, what it can do, what it's done for me in so many other areas as well, what I can do with it. And I'm now studying how it could be used in coaching, so that perhaps either I can coach myself further because I'm integrating. I'm doing that integrating, individuation thing, all sorts of different things, pulling them together. But also maybe to be able to do for other people what I've done for myself and share what I've learned as well. And the story continues. And I don't know what the ending is going to be because I don't look forward. I can only connect the dots back. End of story.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So the first part was was how the character had a career as a librarian, and then she retired, and then she couldn't get out of bed, which is often a metaphor for depression. Sometimes, maybe not in your case, but it wasn't mine. When you hear my life story, you'll hear about my period of depression and not being able to get out of bed. But then you told us about how the character discovered those 4 concepts. What was it? Connect, story, and what else?
Create and explore.
Create, explore, and I think we were interested, I was interested in how exactly did this come about? How did she snap out of it? What was the trigger for her coming up with these 4 words? And you didn't tell us specifically, but you did then do a flashback to your youth, and including your love of reading and learning. So that gave us a sense of where create, explore, connect, and story came from. So as you told it, it was somehow your youth, the love that you experienced from your family, and the intellectual encouragement. It comes off that was that helped you get out of the state you were in of not wanting to get out of bed. Does that feel right? Am I hearing your story correctly?
Probably, yes.
Flashbacks are a very, popular and ancient form of story composition. To tell us about a very dramatic moment happening now, and then maybe leaving it as a cliffhanger, but then going back to where it all began. And then in that unpacking of where it all began, that takes us up to the cliffhanger, and hopefully helps the character overcome. My very favorite book as a young person was about an ice hockey goalie. Now, I almost never played ice hockey, but the structure of the book really got me. I loved it. It was about the goaltender in the ice hockey match, and here he was in the World Championship game, the final game of the World Championship Series, the Stanley Cup for the National Hockey League. And in those days, after 3 periods, if the score was tied, they would go back to the locker room and prepare for sudden death overtime. So this goalie, who the book was about, went back to the locker room, to get ready for sudden death overtime, and he looked in the mirror, and he saw his face. He saw the lines of tension and worry. He saw his gray hair, even though he was only in his 30s. And he thought, time has flown. And then he had a flashback to himself as a child playing on the frozen ice ponds in Canada, and everything that led up to it. And then the final chapter was, okay, we're back in the present, and he goes back on the ice and plays in that last sudden death overtime. I don't even have to tell you whether he won or lost. It's not important. But it was a very effective use, just like yours was, Bronwyn, of a flashback.
Yeah.
Anyone have any other thoughts about Bronwyn's story, the way she told it, the structure of it?
Yeah, I like the way, Bronwyn, that you gave an overarching theme to the story when you use the word hindsight. And generally there's a saying that don't live in the past and live in the present. But I, through my experience, have had several examples of hindsight being important, integral aspect of my present. And I totally resonated with the title of Hindsight, and how you, and I love the way you said it's historians necessary wise. and probably for many it's a virtue and not a vice, and that's beautiful. And the second thing I got very intrigued was that if I heard it right, you said that your father was 50 and your mother was 42 when they had you.
Yes.
And I was also thinking of how that can have its own advantages and own challenges as a child. So I was just, it got me thinking about that. And I said, Bronwyn Richie Rich is now story rich.
Oh, nice.
Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Vikas.
Thank you.
Bronwyn,
Story rich.
when I heard your story, the way you narrated it so beautifully, you started midway, went into a flashback with its own beautiful struggle and how you overcame, and then you brought it to your present state. What touched me was the way you put across, for such a long time there's nothing that you did, and one of those zeros that on the day that you decided to move on and created those 4 words that were magic for you. I think somewhere connected with that part of the story, that past is past, there was in hindsight in terms of what you narrated it off with. And then today what you're doing is a completely new leaf, is a completely new story that you're creating for yourself. And that was very rich for me. That was very profound for me in terms of it got connected with. And the imagery that I was running with was of that seed that was trying to germinate for a long time, quietly dormant and sleeping somewhere. It just found a lot of nourishment, a lot of water, and the soil just helped you to grow to a beautiful plant, a beautiful a sapling that has come out. And there's much more to that sapling today.
I'll hold that, Sid. Thank you.
Welcome, Brian.
So I think the term hindsight is on your mind, perhaps because in hindsight now it sounds like you're seeing how all the pieces are fitting together.
Yeah.
Often one in the process of one's life, there are some things that are confusing, and one may feel that one is not fulfilling one's full potential, that the pieces are not coming together, and that, I don't know, I felt many times that I'm wasting my life. I'm not fulfilling myself. It's all just a waste. But hopefully we work through that, as you have. And then in hindsight, we see that even those periods of frustration had their meaning in the process. And now looking back on it, we can move forward with a clear sense of who we are and where we've come from and how we're going to proceed. But having a clear hindsight like that is certainly a wonderful thing to have going forward in life. Because one, you know where you're coming from, and now you know where you're heading. Christella, you okay?
Bit tired, but okay.
Ah, you look a little tired. You look a little sad somehow. You're okay?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Bronwyn. The English was very fast for me. And not accent I'm used to. So I will hear it again with the video.
That's an Australian accent, right, Bronwyn? You have a Queensland accent?
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks, Christelle. I'm sorry. Well, I'm sad, I suppose, on your behalf, but it will teach me to speak more slowly. How many times, what zero am I up to, and I still need to be reminded to speak more slowly?
No, you were speaking
when the topic is important, sometimes we are with emotion and we speak very, very quick, very fast. So I'm the same.
For me, Bronwyn, I think what stood out in your story is I always keep reading. This thing comes to me all the time, that we are the story that we tell ourselves. So I think for me that stood out in your story. So at every part in your life, you've been telling yourself a certain story, and probably I relate that you were living up to that story at that point of time. So there was a time when you altogether wanted to tell yourself a different story, and you find very contented at this point of time for having found that story that you wanted to tell yourself now. So that is what stood out for me when I was listening to your story. So I am the story that I'm telling myself. So that's what stood out for me. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Lavanya.
Great. Okay, so those of you who have told your stories, keep them in mind, maybe write them down. And really you should have a clear version in first person, quote unquote, just the way it happened. And then for maybe another version in third person about she did this, she did that. And perhaps a version, a metaphorical version. So you want to have 2 or 3 versions. If not written down, just clear in your head. Because when it comes time to creating a metaphorical story, it'll be playing off of your life story. Actually, the story that Biljana told, that could be her metaphorical healing story right there. But she might also want to make up another one. For next week, Vikas, Smita, and Eric, me, we are going to do our life stories, I hope, and really finish this part of the course, because we need to finish this part. But in addition to that, for next week, I invite you to read a little bit about fairy tales and fairy tale therapy. I'll send you links to 2 or 3 little essays regarding fairy tales and fairy tale therapy. Fairy tale therapy is one type of storytelling therapy. Fairy tales are a very beautiful and beloved genre of world story. They're not indigenous to the USA, my culture. They're not really indigenous to India in the sense. I mean, India has the epics, it has the animal fables, but at least the Western type fairy tale is indigenous to the West. Is indigenous to the. Actually, what happened again was that when Christianity was implemented, people who had been worshiping goddesses were told they could no longer worship goddesses. So many of the stories about those goddesses went underground and were recycled into fairy tales. The fairy godmothers, the old lady who lives in the forest, many of their qualities and powers can be traced back to pre-Christian goddesses. So anyway, we'll look at fairy tales as a genre of world story, and then that will be one of our possible techniques that we can use with clients to offer to help them to make a fairy tale version of their own experience or of their own life story. Okay.
Okay.
So shall we? Let me stop recording. I always like to stop recording and then for us to have a couple of words just amongst ourselves. Stop.